I'm Alma Lee. I'm a psychotherapist and transformative lifestyle resiliency coach and author, and I want to help you reach your goals by teaching you how to step outside of those fear-based mindsets and into your powerful, loving self. Let's get started. Let's get into it. Grief. We've all lost people. I've never met a person who hasn't experienced death and loss on some level. Some of us have lost people that are really, really close to us, and I want to get into it. I'd like to share with you today my experiences, my takeaways, my perspectives, both as somebody who has lost people very close to me, as well as the work that I've done with clients, and also my own spirituality. And I hope that it's helpful for you. I want to also ask that you take time to be kind to yourself in listening to this episode, as it may cause you to have some emotions. It might cause some old feelings to come to the surface, maybe some grief or some thoughts or some feelings that maybe you have neatly packed away that for whatever reason you haven't really processed through yet. This isn't a blame game. This isn't about making you upset. Maybe you need to dig into that a little bit. And I hope that this is the opportunity for you, and I hope that this creates a sense of loving kindness for yourself so that you feel like you've got the bandwidth and the ability and maybe some more skills and tools in order to do that. So that being said, I'm not a formally trained grief counselor. I did a couple of classes in grad school when I was becoming a social worker on grief. We touched on it. We certainly discussed how that will show up in our client work, but I'm not it's not a specialty of mine. That being said, I do grief counseling. I do help my clients who show up in session and are processing through loss. And I try to be as transparent to that process. And I've come to the realization that, I had some stuff that I needed to look at. I had some things that I needed to work through and decipher and figure out what's going on with me and my journey here in this incarnation, this meat suit experience. So I want to share my spirituality in alignment with my perspective on grief. When I was about, I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old. It was just before, or it was in first grade. Yeah, it was in first grade. So it had to have been 1979. I'm dating myself. 1979. My great-grandmother, I called her Ma. This was my mother's mother's mother. And I remember her very clearly. She had long gray hair, and she would sit in her recliner all day. And then in the evening, me and my older sister would fight over who got to help her take her long hair out of her bun and put her to bed at night. And then all of a sudden one day she was in the hospital, and then it seemed like the next day we were going to this place where she was laying there asleep in a box. And I didn't really know anything. That I just thought she was sleeping. And I can remember being confused as to why people were upset and people were crying. But I didn't understand the depth of the loss or what that meant. But I do remember spending the night with my grandmother. I don't remember how long after the funeral it was. And my grandmother said, "Do you want to sleep in Ma's room?" Well, normally when I spent the night with my grandmother, I slept either, on the floor. She would, roll out some blankets and quilts for me, and I would sleep on the floor in her room. Or I would sleep in the bed with her if I got scared. But she had asked me if I wanted to sleep in Ma's bed. And I'd never spent the night in Ma's room, so I thought that was a treat. So I said, of course, I'd love to. So she got me set up, and I remember lying in bed. And I, for years, chalked it up to an overactive imagination as a child. I don't remember seeing my great-grandmother standing at the foot of the bed, but I remember feeling her. And I remember wanting to know if she was going to crawl in bed with me. It was a very simple, innocent experience. And it was something that I always carried with me. Even as I got through my teenage years and all the angst and all the stuff that we go through as teenagers, I didn't think much of it. Years later, I had another experience, another spiritual experience is what I like to call it, when my uncle passed away. And he, presented himself in a way that was expressing gratitude after his funeral. And so that one was more in my face. That one was a more deliberate experience. And I thought, there's something more to this. There has to be more to life than just this incarnation. And this was January of 2000 when he passed. And my son was about 4 months old. But I was lying in my bed one morning, and this was shortly after his funeral, maybe a week or so after his funeral. And my son, being the voracious little baby that he was, would always wake up at a certain time. This was a Saturday morning, so I was off, and my son was not crying. And I remember lying there, relishing the peace, relishing the quiet before he started screaming and howling for his bottle. And I was laying there in the bed, and the sun was beating through the window, and I could feel the warmth of the sun shining on my face. And I thought, God, this is absolutely wonderful. He's going to start crying any minute now. I'm just going to lay here and enjoy this. And then somehow in my mind, I heard my uncle. And my uncle had a very distinctive draw, a southern draw. And I remember it was just kind of the understanding. It's the best way I can describe it, that, he appreciated me being there for his wife. And he was just like, I appreciate you doing everything for her. And I was like, listen, if I open my eyes and I see you standing there, I'm going to freak out. So you're good. And I remember hearing his laughter and thinking, this is crazy. I'm losing my mind, right? And I could hear him laugh, and then he was gone. And I opened my eyes, and it was raining outside. There was no sun. This is a true story. And I thought, I must be losing my mind. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm crazy. I'm certain that if I'm crazy, a lot of you are as well, because I'm certain that a bunch of you have probably had similar experiences with just the energy of your loved ones who have passed away. And that's I could sit here and spend the entirety of this episode and tell you how many more experiences that I've had, spiritual experiences that I've had with people who have passed, and just go on and on and on and on. And it's a part of my life now. I don't question it at all. I feel spirits around me all the time. I've spoken to people about their loved ones whenever I feel visited by them. I get visits all the time from people that I've never met in this incarnation, but for whatever reason, I'm connected to their loved ones, and they'll come and pay me a visit and talk to me about their loved ones because they can't reach them. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I've always wanted to, I went to school. I spent a lot of time and effort and energy in being seen as a legitimate clinician, somebody who studied hard and got the degree and got the license and wants to be seen as a valid person with clinical interventions. But you can't do clinical interventions if you're not, being a human being first. And you have to be transparent in your own experience as a human. And these are my transparent experiences as a human that are deeply spiritual. And they tie into the grief work that I do with my clients and what I want to share with you today. And I want to pose I want to ask you to do something, especially if you're hurting, if you're missing someone, if you feel a depth of loss, a vacancy, a vacuum where somebody has died, somebody who has left their physical body and has transitioned back to consciousness, and you feel like that person is gone. I'd like to ask that you suspend that disbelief for just a moment and entertain me and just engage me and humor me, if you will, on this exercise. And this is what I do with my clients. I want you to pretend that the roles are reversed. I want you to imagine that it was you that passed. Think about it. Think about who you are now in your meat suit. All of a sudden, you just don't have your meat suit anymore. By the way, that's what transitioning is that's all we do. It's a metamorphosis. Death doesn't exist. It just doesn't. we go through a metamorphosis where our physical incarnation, it runs out, it doesn't work anymore, and so we have to get rid of it. And so our consciousness just leaves it behind. That's really all there is to it. I want you to imagine that you are where you are right now without your body. And then I want you to pay attention to your loved ones who can no longer experience you with the senses that we have been programmed to use to interpret our environment, which is the 5 senses. In reality, the 6th sense is the strongest and the most important one, which is your intuition. Your higher consciousness is the echo that's in your gut feeling, your sense of self. When you sense that you have someone around you, when you have that feeling where the hair on the back of your neck stands up, that is your most in tune sense. That's the one that stays with you. The 5 senses, that's just part of your meat suit, and that's what we're programmed to focus on, and that's what we're programmed to believe is the only valid way of communicating. When people transition back to consciousness and they lose their meat suit, we've only lost those ways of communicating, those ways of sensing them. We can't see them with our physical eyes. We can't hear them with our physical ears. We can't taste the food that they make for us. We can't smell their perfume that they wear. Well, we can talk about that, but and we can't touch them, right? And so we feel a sense of loss because we've lost that. But what have we lost? We've lost the meat suit. You haven't lost that person. If you transitioned out of your meat suit, what do you think your loved ones would think and feel? Better yet, ask yourself this: how would you want them to live their lives? Okay? Grief is just love that's a little bit lost and doesn't know where to go. Because there's that program, that's the meat suit program. That's where we are in our incarnation in this physical establishment. That's what we've been programmed to lean into. How would you feel if you could experience your loved ones as a form of the greater consciousness and know that they are struggling and know that they're hurting? Wouldn't you try to connect with them? Wouldn't you want them to feel you? Wouldn't you want them to hear you? And better yet, wouldn't you want them to live their best life? Wouldn't you want your loved ones to live a purposeful life? Wouldn't you want your spouse to find a companion to enjoy the rest of their physical life with? You may or may not. I don't know. That might be a different podcast. I don't want to speak for you. But let's talk about kids. Let's talk about siblings. Let's talk about best friends. You know, it can be terribly troublesome to consider, you know, you're the one who transitioned, you're the one who passed away, to see how deeply hurt they are by by losing you, or what they perceive as the loss of you. Wouldn't that bother you if you knew as a form of consciousness that they were struggling and suffering? I think I would. I think I would want my children, my best friends, I would want people that love me to live their absolute best life. I would want them to know that I'm around them at all times and that I love them deeply. This is the grief work that I do with clients, because in order to process your grief, you gotta dig into your own views on spirituality. You just have to. And even if you don't see yourself as a spiritual person, even if you believe that this is all there is, then there's some solace in that, you know, if that's what you believe, don't you believe that that person is no longer struggling or suffering? And don't you believe that you should use whatever time you have left on this earth to the best of your ability, especially when you can be of purpose and service to the rest of humanity and those around you? So, grief. It hurts. You feel lost. There's an opportunity there, though. I lost my father in 2018, and then my mother rapidly declined in her health condition, and she was gone just barely over 2 years later. Her cancer came back with a vengeance after my father passed, and I think that she manifested that. I really do. She was lost without him. And I've spoken about my parents and the disconnect that I had with them prior to their transition back to consciousness. It's interesting, though, that with their passing, that I've had to force myself to look inward and do my own introspection, to meditate deeply, to figure out, what is it that I believe? What is it that I feel within the depth of me, in my deepest consciousness? And I believe that everything is energy. I believe that we are energy. I don't think that anything is a mistake. No matter how traumatic or painful it is, I think everything that we go through in this life, to include the loss of each other over time, there's purpose in that. It's not payback. It's not that, patriarchal conditions of good versus evil. It is karmic, but it's intended for us to grow. It's intended for us to do our spiritual homework. This is class. This is an education. That's all this meat suit experience is an education. It's an education in evolving our consciousness, because we are in a space of adversity where we are presented with situations where we expand our spiritual consciousness through the experience of pain as well as love and joy. And it's the pendulum effect. Whatever we experience that's adverse, any amount of pain or trauma or tragedy that we experience, we also have the polarity of that. There is the pendulum effect of that. So anything to the degree of pain that we experience, we open ourselves up to experience the polarization of that in the same amount in joy. So that's the purpose in that. That's why I always say comfort is the enemy to growth. Because if you're comfortable, you're stagnant. You're not changing. You're not growing. You're not healing. You're not moving. You're stationary. You're just okay. You're just good enough. You're not reaching forward. So everything has a purpose, even your grief. And the question is that, are you choosing to live your life in a space of pain and victimization because you lost someone that you loved so much? Is that what you're doing? Are you fearful of reconnecting with new people because you're fearful that you're not going to love someone as much as you loved your lover, your partner, your friend, your sibling, your child, your parents, your grandparents? I meditated once a couple years ago when I was first getting into meditation, and I couldn't get my little squirrel brain to slow down. I was like, I can't do this. I can't meditate. I can't figure this out. And I forced myself to sit down in a dark room with just a candle, and I just stared at the flickering candle. And in that flickering candle, I saw like a little white angel in the center of the flame. And that little white angel reminded me of the angel costumes that my sister and her friends got to wear in the Christmas play at my grandmother's church back in 1978. And I didn't get an angel costume because I guess I was too little. I wasn't in the play. And then that reminded me of my grandmother. And this whole thing, my mind is just going down this rabbit hole of memories. And then all of a sudden, I remember that my grandmother would always give us a piece of gum, the Wrigley's gum, had the white label on it. I don't know if it was spearmint or wintergreen or peppermint. I'm not sure, but it was the white one. And she'd rip it in half and make me share it with my sister. And I'm sitting there in this meditation. I am in the church. I'm in the church. And it's 1978. I'm physically there. I feel like I'm physically there. And all of a sudden, I could taste the gum. I didn't have any gum in my mouth, but I could taste it. And I was like, all of a sudden, just zap back in time. And it was just like, that was crazy. And I've been trying to get to that space ever since. But the funny thing is about that is that each evolution where you attempt to connect with your higher consciousness is different. And that's all I was doing, was just kind of playing around in the consciousness of it all and expanding my sense of awareness outside of this meat suit. That's what this is. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't grieve. You should grieve. Losing people is painful. I tear up all the time. I think about people that, that I would just like to have a sit-down conversation with. People that I don't think about that often, and some random occurrence will pop into my mind, and I'll be like, I wonder how that person's doing, and then I'll remember that they transitioned, and I'll be like, that's a trip. And I'm not saying that death and dying does, you should just get over it, or it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it is a big deal, but it's a lesson. It's a lesson. First of all, it's something that we cannot avoid. There's pain, loss, and separation in all relationships at some point, even if it's you that leaves, you see. And instead of, this is what I want to sort of wrap up with, to challenge you, especially if you're struggling with the loss of someone that you love. Think about that person. And what would that person say to you right now with how you're dealing with their loss? What would they say to you? Be honest. I often tell my clients that, do it when you're in the car when you're driving, because we ride and drive and talk to our friends when they're here in the meat suit. You can do that now anyway. Plus, you have the privacy in case you're emotional. Just don't start bawling at the wheel, or pull over if you do. But think about that person. Think about who they were to you and who they still are to you, and talk to them in the present tense. That's the important thing, is because it's important to use present tense because they're still here. They just don't have a meat suit, and you can't use your meat suit to connect with them anymore. That's really what you've lost, if you think about it. If you really break it down, that's all you've lost, is the ability to connect with them through material and particle means. Now you have to engage your energetic means, your philosophical world, your mindset, your consciousness to connect. And that might be uncomfortable for some of you. I encourage you to try it. I encourage you to be still. I know that it can be difficult because, especially for those of you who have experienced hell on earth, childhood full of trauma, tragedy, abuse, loss, neglect, and you've never really worked through that, or you have repressed it, you may be very fearful of revisiting those experiences by quietening your mind in an effort to connect with someone that you've lost. It's okay. It's okay. You're not the first person. You're not going to be the last. And I can tell you that a fear of meditation is a fear of seeing yourself. And you have to connect with your consciousness in order to connect with these folks that you love and miss. But in doing so, you also have to connect with yourself. And I think that's what a lot of people get stuck on, is they get into a routine, they get into a what is perceived as a safe space within their world, and how they sort of function and go through their day-to-day activities by being superficial, by being inauthentic. No shade. It's a survival mechanism. It's a trauma response. But there's a huge well of love and opportunity for connection when you look at your fears and allow yourself to engage in your spiritual growth and healing. Man, here's something I'll share with you too, and then we'll wrap up. When my father died, I cried. I cried, even though I hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, and then prior to that, 8. So total about 8 years, or 10 years total. I really didn't have a relationship with him. And the relationship I had to him up until the time I went no contact was terribly disruptive and chaotic. We just could not get along because, we had issues, and he had stuff that he didn't work through and couldn't work through. But he died in 2018, and I cried. But I cried because I knew that it was over. And I was happy that I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him, but I just didn't hate him anymore. And there was peace in that. But here's the interesting thing, right? Is that about 3 days after his funeral, which I did not attend, I was I was living in Colorado and he was in Alabama. I had a dream that I was in. It was a very large room, like a gym, like a high school gymnasium, but it was dark. It was pitch black. And there, over my head, I was sitting in a chair, and over my head was just one singular spotlight when the white light just washed over me. And I couldn't see anything more than maybe 3 feet around me. Until off in the distance, I see this figure walk towards me. This is a dream that I was having, or so I thought. It was in the middle of the night, dead asleep. And I'm in this room, and in this distance, I see a figure walking towards me. And it just happened so fast, and all of a sudden he walks up, and it's my dad. And he looks very much like he did when I stopped talking to him. He was older and frail and far less threatening than I found him to be as a child. And he walked up to me, and I can remember feeling, "Are you serious?" And he walked right up to me, didn't say anything, and he put his arms around me. He said, "I love you, Lee." And I was like, geez, even in death, you can't respect my boundaries. And he looked back at me and he said, "I'm sorry." And then he walked away and he was gone. And I got up the next morning, I drank my coffee, I cried. It was so real. It was so real. And I was angry and I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready. I was going through a divorce or getting ready to go through a divorce. I think it was a lot. I was going through a lot. Let's just leave it at that. And I didn't need that. I didn't need that additional garbage. So I never, nothing else ever happened. And then life happened and got divorced and, moved back to Charleston. And my mom was sick and her condition just readily exacerbated and declined. And then in July of 2020, she passed. And I went to her funeral and really didn't have any issues with her at first. But the interesting thing about that was, it was probably maybe about 3 months after my mother had passed. And I had been doing a lot of healing work. I had gotten myself on my own without the disruption of my previous environment and was really digging into the meditative process. And was asleep again one night. And in this dream, I was walking into what appeared to be a very brightly lit clinical environment. It was whitewashed walls and empty chairs. It was like a doctor's office or a dentist's office or something, but it was brightly lit with fluorescent. It was very clinical and cold and no art, no warmth, nothing to it. And I'm walking into this room and I look to the right, and it's a smaller room. It's not a big cavernous room like before, but I walk in and there's a glass sliding window and there's a lady sitting behind this glass sliding window. It's a small window. And I look over and she's typing away at a computer and I see behind her is a figure, but it's blurry. I can't see who it is. And I stare, and as I keep staring, the figure starts coming into clarity. And all of a sudden, it was my dad. But this time, my dad appeared in his most fearful form. He had dark hair, he had a big mustache, he had on a heavy leather coat. My father always wore a heavy leather coat, and he would carry a key ring. For years, I had panic attacks when I heard key rings jingling. And he had a leather attaché case that he would carry around and he would keep guns and drugs in. And this was year-round. He would wear a leather coat because he was always wearing a firearm. But that was what intimidated me and scared me the most. And this is how he appeared behind the glass. And I saw him. And I don't know what it was, but he looked at me and he had this look in his eyes like, "Can I come out there? Can I come see you?" And I waved to him and I said, "Yeah, sure. I waved for him." And he eagerly, almost with childlike enthusiasm, he came bounding through the door that magically appeared in the wall. And he comes up to me and he throws his arms around me and he hugs me and he says, "I love you, Lee. I love you so much." And I said, "I love you too, Daddy." And I looked at him and he says, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "I'm so proud of you." And I said, "I love you, Daddy, and I appreciate that." And then he was gone. And it was, I didn't look for forgiveness. I wasn't looking for it, but it just happened. It just washed. It was like a cleansing. It was like, it is time to let all of that go because I got work to do. I have to be future focused, and I have to share these narratives, and I have to share this story with people, and I have to let people know that it's okay to heal and to let go of, and it's okay to even express love and compassion and understanding for people who hurt you. And I can tell you right now with 100% honest sincerity, I have absolutely no anger, venom, or hatred in my heart. I don't have room for it. Love has taken up everything in my heart, where it used to be torn apart with venom and resentment and anger and, rage. I don't have room for it anymore. And I don't grieve. My mom, I feel like my mom is with me all the time. My mom is She's a part of my spirit team. She's with me daily. We drink coffee together. We talk. We have conversations. I don't grieve my parents because, they're just there. And whoever your loved one is that you miss is there too. And seek and ye shall find. And when you're ready to learn, the teacher will appear. These are all the things that I've learned along the way, and I'm still learning, and I'm still growing, and I'm still healing, and I'm still evolving. But through it all, I enjoy it, and I love it, and I feel actualized in my purpose in sharing those stories with you. So, heal, pay attention. That little feeling you get when you think that person is around you, when that loved one comes calling, when you notice something or remember an obscure memory or find a coin or, those synchronicities, it's your loved one trying to connect with you the only way they can. The only thing it is that you just got to be ready and let them in. All right. From Fear to Love. This has been an LBM production. Please like, subscribe, and share this show. Thanks for listening.